Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacy, and I'm a bookseller and the events coordinator at Belmont Books. Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of virtual events coming up, including Claire Willis and Marnie Crawford Samuelson discussing Opening to Grief tomorrow, and Julie Carrick Dalton discussing Waiting for the Night Song with Andrew Krivak on Thursday. You can register for these and our other events on our website, belmontbooks.com, which is where you can also purchase tonight's book, -1. If you have any concerns during the presentation, you can send a message in the chat section. If you have any questions for the authors, please type them into the Q&A section, and I will relay as many as possible to Doris and Rishi after the presentation. We're very excited to welcome Doris and Rishi. I want to tell you a little bit about them, and then I will turn the event over to them. Dr. Doris Iarovici grew up in New York City, having been born in Romania. She began writing shortly thereafter and first published poetry and essays in 17 magazine as a teenager. She has since divided her time between writing and medicine and has published both fiction and nonfiction. In addition to -1, Doris is the author of American Dreaming and Other Stories and Mental Health Issues and the University Student. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, and Crab Orchard Review. She's been awarded writing fellowships from the Jurassic Resident Artist Program in California, Virginia Center for the Creative Arts in Virginia, Hambidge Center in Georgia, and the North Carolina Arts Council. Doris works as a psychiatrist at Harvard University and lives in Boston. Rishi Reddi is the author of the award-winning collection Karma and Other Stories. Stories from Karma appear in Best American Short Stories, have been broadcast on National Public Radio, performed at New York City's Symphony Space, and were chosen for honorable mention for the Pushcart Prize and chosen for the Boston Book Festival's One City, One Story community read. Her most recent book, Passage West, has been recommended by The Bustle, Book Riot, Ms. Magazine, and The Millions. Rishi was born in India and grew up in Great Britain and the United States. She has worked as an environmental lawyer and served on the boards of Grub Street and SALT, a national nonpartisan organization that represents the South Asian American community. Her essays and translations have appeared in numerous publications, and she has received grants and fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, Breadloaf Writers Conference, the U.S. Department of State, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. She lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And without further ado, I will turn the event over to them, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Hey, Doris, it is great to be here with you today. I am so happy to be here with you. I read -1 with great interest, and I was really struck by the emotional accuracy, the insight, and the impact that your stories had. And I have to say, just at the opening here, that what really struck me was your whopper last sentences. They were like a gut punch. At the end of every story, it really got you on an emotional level. So for the most part, I thought that all of those stories were really about everyday people in everyday experiences. But they were extraordinary in terms of their resilience, the characters' sense of hope, and the ability to get beyond their hard times. So I was hoping maybe you could give us a little example of your work to start us off.
Great, thanks so much, Rishi, and thanks for saying that about the last sentences. I do spend a lot of time trying to craft the ending of the stories, so I appreciate your saying that. And I also want to say thank you to Belmont Books and to you, Rishi, for doing this with me. And you may hear my cat in the background. I apologize for that. If it's annoying, let me know and I can put on headphones. But she has a new habit of like meowing at the door, and she just decided to do it right now. So.
Well, I have my dog at my door as well, so he may have to come in as well. So he may have to come in right now.
Pandemic life. Okay, so I'm going to read for about just under 10 minutes from the first story in the collection, a story called One Way It Could Happen. And the story was originally published in the Portland Review, which is a literary magazine out of Portland, Oregon. One Way It Could Happen. 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, or sometimes later, you see them one after the other. The young mom who can't stop crying, the 20-year-old hearing voices, some so anxious it takes them 3 weeks and a ride from a daughter to make it out of their house. Plus the skeletal ones with tracks up their arms, the doughy ones with roomy eyes from too much Jack Daniels, the teens with cross-hatched wrists. Can you all hear the cat? Is it distracting? Okay. I'm gonna put in headphones. I think it's distracting me, sorry. Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay. So it's not like you it's not like you wouldn't notice in your own house. Not like you don't think about these things every moment of every day, but maybe when you get home, you would like to read the living section of the newspaper, focus on new recipes for lower calorie lasagna, sit in the recliner and have someone else make dinner and bring you a glass of wine, but that's not usually how it goes, how it went. And of course, you did notice, not just last year, but all those years ago, the little boy who went from following his dad as if an umbilical cord connected the two of them, to fighting at school, so the principal called you in, followed by the even more alarming time of silence, and then the time of slammed doors. You noticed, you spoke up. 8 to 5, when you say something, people pay attention, either the patients themselves or their families, or sometimes social services. You speak and faces tilt toward you like the yellow swamp sunflowers along 15501 swing toward the light. And you scroll out prescriptions or admission orders or appointment cards, and people's lives turn around. Or sometimes they don't. At church, in the neighborhood, everyone's so supportive. In a town of 6,000, news spreads fast. Plus, it was your idea to be honest for the newspaper. The flowers and the casseroles, the hugs from people who barely used to nod when you passed one another walking the dogs. But the others, the overhead snatches of conversation, are like shivs through the left side of your rib cage, even the cliches. A druggie and his mother a psychiatrist. You'd think she'd know how to get him help. Goes to show you never can tell. The theories, parents worked all the time, were never there. Father some hotshot engineering dean over at Duke, brilliant but no common sense. Maybe it's the genes. The mother was a wild one herself in her youth. If they'd spent more time in church, or she's so busy with her fancy job that the family slips through the cracks. Though of course it wasn't you they meant, not every time. It wasn't you who got called into the principal's office. His father went with the boy's mother. Surely you must have imagined the other comments, not really her son, not biologically, a very messy divorce, so what can you expect? People split up without a thought to the kids. You met Finn as a wide-eyed, red-headed 4-year-old, already freckled, pink with sun, who crawled into his father's arms like a koala, then snapped his head around to catch the kiss his father gave you behind his back, right after he introduced you. He was already alert to secrets. You offered up your tube of zinc oxide, but he grimaced as if it were excrement, and his father brushed it away. The three of you strolled through the farmer's market, past the crates of rainbow chard and tiny carrots and fairy tale eggplant. You offered to buy him a sunflower, heavy with black seeds, had already paid for the plastic cup of lemonade. But he refused both, eyes downcast. His dad said, "You want ice cream, honey? Want me to take you to the pool later?" His parents had been separated a year at that point, with the divorce papers due to finalize any day. He was already big for his age, off the charts, carrying within his cells his mother's propensity for height, but his father's stocky build, so that he lumbered in a body that made him oafish as he aged, made him trip over his own feet, made other kids shy away, because if he shoved them, he inadvertently knocked them down. The tips of buzz-cut fuzz were already at the principal's shoulder in first grade, so she showed no leniency when he brought the keychain army knife to school. He insisted he hadn't threatened anyone or extended the blade. No leniency, even when you tried to explain it had belonged to his father's father, who had died the week before. It was your one foray into school because his father was recovering from the surgery for the slipped disc, and his mother was in Wilmington shooting a short film that was to open the documentary film festival in the spring. Shooting a film that would screen at some time during the festival. Shooting a film, but her scenes were cut at the last minute. Bastard director promised the moon, but shooting a car dealership commercial, which you finally discovered only when the boy fell asleep over his dinner one evening. She had let him stay up so they could watch it air on late night local television. In the car on the way home from the principal's office, having been suspended for the rest of the week, he didn't say a word. 6 years old and sat like a Buddha, arms crossed, lower jaw jutting, oblivious to your cooing tone, to your promises that somehow you would recover the tiny weapon inscribed on the blade with his grandfather's initials. Which you did, many letters and phone calls later, but by then his mother had procured a signed photograph of Ludacris, which he received on the same day, and he tossed the little knife onto the coffee table without a second glance. And there it stayed until the housekeeper set it in a saucer of loose change the following Monday, in which you found it years later when digging for quarters to take on the long drive north to take Evan to camp. 8 to 5, you refer people to behavioral therapists, to couples counselors, to learning specialists, and a few weeks later, you get typewritten reports that you initial and file and consult as needed. And his father did make an appointment with the child psychiatrist at the University Medical Center after Finn gave him a black eye by slamming a football directly into his face at close range, then insisting it was his father's fault for standing too close, for trying to wrestle away the ball after the third time he said no throwing in the house. But his mother was running late that day, couldn't find parking, had the younger one too, who was tantruming in the car seat, and afterward rescheduled Finn's appointment with her lover's cousin's wife, an acupuncturist who had gotten certified in marriage and family therapy after her own first divorce, who charged half as much as the university guy, plus could get him in within the next 2 days. Finn's baby sister almost never stayed with you. Your husband grumbled that though his ex had been the one to insist on having kids, she had never wanted the burden of actually raising them. But the little girl went everywhere with her mother. You tried to stay out of their loose interpretation of joint custody because it led to arguments. Finn was often deposited at your house with minimal advanced planning, even on weeknights or Saturdays when he was scheduled to be with his mom. Other times, she would pick him up for a few hours on a whim, calling that morning to say she missed him terribly, taking him to brunch and a movie right after you had fed him pancakes. By the time he was 9, if you restricted television because he had cursed or flouted a rule, he'd demand to go to his mother's. His father usually said no, but Finn would text his mother and then she'd call, and sometimes it was easier to say yes. By that time, Evan was 2, a sweet-tempered, quiet toddler whose dark eyes widened with glee at the sight of his older half-brother. In the black moments when you sit by the window before dawn, unable to fall back asleep, you allow a truth into your heart. You cherished the days your household was 3 and not 4. It's like rain slithering down the nape of your neck, that thought. You've dedicated your life to helping people, especially kids, get better. But such calm when it was you, your own easy baby, and your husband. Dinner without drama, the taciturn man softening at the babbling child, then Evan nestled in his father's arms, fingers hooked around his father's earlobe as he listened to the 17th reading of Go Dog Go while you cleared dinner dishes. Finn will have much more stability now, your friends had said in the beginning, when you all first moved in together. He'll finally have clear rules and consistent consequences. You're a steady person. You and his father will model a loving relationship. But the first time you caught him with alcohol in his room, age 11, it ballooned into an argument between you and his dad. Where the hell do you get this? His dad, normally so reserved, became rapidly enraged, dealing with Finn. Shook the fifth of bourbon in the air, inches from Finn's nose. Tell me this moment. This is not normal for a kid, Finn. You want to end up in jail? You want me to end up in jail? And I'm going to stop there. Thank you. You're muted still, Rishi.
Thank you, Doris. That is a really moving story. It's the first one in the collection. And it's about a psychiatrist who helps children every day, all of her life, and then is unable to see what's at her own doorstep and the trouble that her stepson is heading towards. And I know you must get this question all the time, but I think it's infinitely fascinating to those of us who are literary folks, you know, who style ourselves as armchair therapists. So I have to ask it again, even though I know you get it all the time, is what do you feel that your professional life as a psychiatrist informs your writing? And if so, in what ways? You know, it's almost, when I was first reading your work and I realized that you were a psychiatrist, I had a little tinge of jealousy because I felt like you had the inside track on humanity, whereas all I could do was listen and watch. And so could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's really funny. So actually, as an aside, Freud is quoted as saying at some point, I don't think I'm quoting him correctly, but it's something like, it is not I, but the poet who discovered the unconscious. So I actually do think writers and poets and creative people of all kinds have a similar way of looking at psychological makeup as mental health professionals. So I think that in some ways, that if you're someone who loves books and literature and you know, is interested in making art, and you happen to go to med school, as I did,
Yeah.
I think it's natural to be drawn toward the field of psychiatry. You know, does it influence my writing? I think absolutely it influences my writing, just because I've been practicing for many years now, and you know, the sorts of stories that I am in many ways privileged to hear. You know, it is a privilege to have that window into people's lives. Certainly affect me emotionally, and also just make me think about a lot of things in my own life and my own experience. And then it's also can be really difficult, because when I first started out working as a psychiatrist, I was very aware that I needed to maintain really clear boundaries around confidentiality, right? So I couldn't take anyone's stories and write about them. But I think as I've, you know, now had over, you know, 25 years of experience working in the field, I've seen so many people and heard so many stories that I think that what I end up writing about are what I'm drawn to are experiences that they're very specific, but they also have sort of universal themes in them, right? So this particular story, it was kind of a combination of, you know, working with a lot of young adults who are struggling with various kinds of addiction, and then also knowing, unfortunately, you know, that it was initially inspired by somebody I knew in my professional circle who lost a child to addiction, and it was quite sad and shocking to, I think, all the rest of us, that, you know, how is it possible that someone who seems to have like an insider track to treatment or would know what to do in that kind of situation, how is it possible that this could happen? But, you know, unfortunately now I know, you know, several people in my social circle, and my children have known kids in their schools who've really struggled with addiction. And so again, but I was very interested in looking at both the I guess the personal and the professional, the personal and the much larger world, and the ways that you know, it can be really difficult to to have an impact when there are many, many forces at play in a family. You know, families are complicated, and you know, this particular family, a blended family, has its own challenges in the story.
No, and it must actually be very humbling to realize that in the end, you know, that this particular character was primarily a human and a mother, and not really able to apply the professional training. That's what struck me at the end of the book, is that in the end, she was just a mom, you know, with all the fallibility of that. And I felt that the stories throughout were thematically connected, Doris, about loss, about, I mean, it's such an apt title, the hole that one person leaves in the family when they're no longer there, and the way that others rush to try to fill that hole, what they do to take the place of that person, and how you really can't do that. So I was just, and then I was also struck with the sense of resiliency and hope that there was, because for the most part, we visit the characters when they are on the crest of getting past that, you know, sense of despair and evolving into some other place where they've come to terms with their loss. Now, these are all themes that we as a country are dealing with right here and now, you know, among so many people that we've lost, some of us, you know, more than one member of the older generation. I'm just wondering, how did these stories evolve for you over time? And was it something that you were grappling with sort of consciously, that you felt you had to deal with? Or was it something that you arrived at later on when they had all come together?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I didn't set out to write a collection of short stories, so that was not my my goal. I was working on another project, and I had started writing stories on the side just because I love short stories.
Yeah, so do I.
I read a lot of short fiction, yeah. And you're a great short story writer yourself. So in some ways, short stories are a place of rest for me. And I actually think in the pandemic, I've been reading more short fiction again too, because it's hard to concentrate on longer
Absolutely.
books.
Oh my gosh, it's hard to write long stuff, and it's hard to read.
It's hard to, yes.
I am right there with you, yeah.
Yes. So, so these stories were like over many years, kind of coming up for me when I was taking a break, or sometimes when I was avoiding doing other things. And I think the theme arose, they started out with, there were several stories about widows or other, you know, widows, widowers, people who'd lost a spouse, in kind of in the wake of having lost my own husband quite young. And then what I was aware of consciously was that I actually did not want to write about that. I was like, that's going to be depressing. People aren't going to want to read about that. I didn't want to write about it. But as time went on, the stories started popping up. And I think also as time went on, I got to know a lot of people who were in that same situation. I met people younger than myself, you know, which was kind of really upsetting to me, because it's like, oh my God, it can be worse. Or, you know, again, it's like, it's not the grief Olympics, right? We kind of talk about how it's hard to compare people's levels of grief, because it's a personal experience, right, for each of us. But we all tend to do that too. Like, it could be worse, it could be better. But I started, and then I began to really become interested in again, just the particularity of the experience of losing a spouse for each person, and then also just like the universality of the experience. So the both and. So some people that I met, I felt like we shared so much, and for other people, the experience had really been quite different. And so I became more intentional about trying to riff on that theme, you know, kind of putting characters in different situations, and, you know, maybe picking a point of departure that I was familiar with, and then trying to take it in a direction that was completely different for me, or different from my own experience, to see what happened in the story. And then the stories kind of evolved into, you know, more generally looking at absence. You know, then I kind of thought of this title, and I thought this could be a way to write a number of stories riffing on this theme of, as you said, the loss of one person, and how painful that can be, and in some ways destabilizing, and then also just the, my interest in how different people deal with it and kind of get to the other side.
And it's true, we do all do that about, oh, it could be so much worse. I mean, it's part of the exercise of helping ourselves get over something. And the other part of that is, it's true, it can always be worse. No doubt that it could always be worse. So there is a trick that, that we play with ourselves about that. But I noticed too, Doris, we have lots of similarities in our writing. I mean, we have the short story connection, but also we're both immigrants. I also came to the US around the age that you did. I think you came over at 5 and I came over at 4, from continents away. And I'm just wondering, in addition to this theme of loss and resilience, how has immigration, and perhaps even the sense of loss that happens through immigration, permeated your work? Because I felt that too. I felt like the stories had a sense of the loss of one person, but there was another larger sense of something that, a connection that a person had that they no longer had. The story about the Romanian grandmother, that had that sense to it for me. And I'm wondering if you feel that your status as an immigrant, your experience really did affect the way these stories were shaped.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the experience of immigration is, as you know, extremely powerful, right? And it shapes us. And at the same time, I think that, when I was younger, I wasn't aware of how much it shaped me. As a kid, you're just basically trying to fit in and to kind of maybe not pay attention to some of the experiences that you have that are different. But I think actually the experience of immigration leaves you forever, to some degree, an observer, and, kind of maybe a more careful observer of yourself and people around you than people who have not had that experience, right? Because from the very beginning, there's a sense of, othering, like you're different than people around you. And even, I grew up in New York City. There were many immigrant kids from all over the world, which was, I think, a wonderful experience. But there is this sense of being other, and I think that it comes through in the writing. I'm quite interested in writing actually about immigration. This book has a couple of immigrant characters, not as many, I think, as my first short story collection, and then some of my longer work. I'm trying to really to think about it, but again, I feel like everything that's happened in probably in the last 4 years, maybe longer, but in particular in the last 4 years around immigration in our country has made me kind of think about it in new ways, and think about, my own blind spots and where I think that I understand the experience of immigration, but maybe I don't. How it's even more difficult for certain groups of people today than it was for me coming over, or, I can't speak to what your experience was like, but just that awareness that, again, we're united in the experience, but it's also very different for different people. And
yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there's something to, when you're an outsider looking in, that you have an ability to see things that you can't have when you completely belong. And that's in any group, small or large. It doesn't even have to be on the scale of immigration, that there's an insight to not being invested in any particular group within the society. I definitely think that's true. And I'm struck when I first came to the US in the early 70s, there were not so many Indians here then. It was a small group. Now it seems much larger and so much more higher profile than I ever would have imagined. And I'm wondering, the fact that coming from a Romanian background, that's that strikes me as a relatively small immigrant population. And that has an additional layer of sort of, wow, how many people are actually present that would be able to relate to one's experience? You know,
Yeah.
it's different from being an immigrant from Italy, say, or something like that, you know.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. When my family came over, I remember that there were people who had never heard of Romania back then when I was in school. People would try to guess where we were from because they could hear that my family, my parents had accents, and often they would guess like Spain or Puerto Rico, or, you know, it just wasn't in the like, and Italy because of our last name. But it just wasn't on the radar until actually Nadia Comaneci won the Olympics, and then
Yeah.
people that put Romania on the map for Americans. But yeah, it's still. I mean, I think that there are probably more Romanians for sure in the U.S. now. You know, my family's also Jewish, so that was another kind of like yet another separation within the categorization of other. Both in Romania and then, you know, in the US, actually, I think we were part of a bigger community of Jewish people than where we had come from. So that's sort of interesting. And in New York, then I moved to the South, and then it was all different again. So
Yeah.
um,
Well, those are different Venn diagrams, right? Of
different Venn. Exactly. Yeah,
You have
exactly.
you had choices. You had choices.
Yes.
Right, at the end.
Exactly.
I'm just wondering, how do you find time? Because I grapple with this myself all the time, Doris. Like, I have a demanding day job. I know you have a demanding day job. How do you make the creative endeavor work? I'm sure there's folks in our audience that are wondering about that. And even day to day or in the long term, you know, whether you're working on something
Yeah.
small or whether you're working on something big, how does that work itself out for you?
So I think that's a huge, challenging question that I think most writers have to deal with at some point in their life. I think, again, you know, growing up in an immigrant family, it was never sort of an option to just have writing be my job. Like, that just wasn't in the realm of possibilities.
I
In
know
some
all
ways,
about
you know,
I know.
can
all
you
about
relate?
that. Writing is not a job, right?
Writing is not a job. So, you know, there were a lot of examples of physician writers when I was growing up, and I do think, again, as I said, medicine, you do have this amazing window into people's lives, which can be very helpful if you're also a writer. But I think that what I didn't fully appreciate when I was looking at physician writers was that for the most part, at least the ones I grew up with, they were all men, they were all male. So they all had like wives and help and a lot of support. And, you know, I think it's the other piece of that is that if you're a woman, I think, and if you're a woman who wishes to have children, then it's even more complicated because you have to balance a lot of demands on your time. But I would say that the most important piece of it for me has always been being intentional about it and realizing that unless you come up with a schedule, whatever the schedule is that works for you, it's not going to happen. So, you know, when I was a resident, when I was in training, I was writing very little just because the hours were so long that there were literally not enough hours in the day to work and sleep. And, you know, and then I also had children toward the, you know, second part of my residency. So it just wasn't going to happen. And I had to kind of not beat myself up over that because it just wasn't possible at that time. It wasn't that I wasn't writing at all. I started writing poetry some then, and I was writing essays and anything super short, some short stories, but they had to be really short. But then that time ended, and you know, initially I was working full time when I finished training, and that was when I realized that probably if I continued to do that and raise kids, the writing wasn't going to happen, and I needed to kind of rebalance things. And you know, so I structured my life so that I gave up some things that I had thought I was going to do in my psychiatry career.
I gave up a lot of money because it was just like the jobs were that were more lucrative were many more hours. And I just decided that writing would have to be scheduled into my days. And then I think also just asking for help, right? So I had, friends who helped. I had a supportive spouse who, but he did die. And then I had many other people who stepped in. So my parents actually were enormously helpful with when I got writing residencies, or, the opportunity to write for a concentrated period of time. People stepped in and helped me. And just sort of accepting that, which is also very hard. If you're a mom, it feels, I had a lot of guilt about like taking any time away from my kids. But I think, something has to give. So just finding a schedule that works, finding, now I work half time as, as a psychiatrist. And in theory, I'm writing the other half the time. I have not been, during the pandemic, it's been very hard for me to write, just to have the kind of clarity of mind to focus on creative work. So it's slowly getting better, but it's been a tough year for writing.
Yeah, Doris, I cannot tell you, almost every single thing you're saying is something that I related to. I had no idea that all this time that I'd known you for these years, I had no idea that we had so much in common.
I know.
I know, it's really remarkable. And the thing that strikes me about that balance between day job, children, and the writing addiction, because it's something we
Yes.
just give up, right? It's kind of an addiction. It's unreasonable. Why do we do it? There's no money in it, et cetera, et cetera. But it's something we can't give up. And then I have to say one portion of it that's really strikes me as very difficult in my life is the ability when I am trying to work on something I can't skip 2 days and still be at the same place that I was, because my unconscious won't keep it inside. It won't stay with me. And then you really have to backpedal and make up for time that's lost. That's what strikes me as being extremely difficult with having a demanding day job, because that's what takes up your imagination if you allow it to.
Yes.
To carve out the space for this other, more whimsical, not in terms of mood, but whimsical in terms of like its fragility, to keep it alive inside you. It is what strikes me as really difficult. And yes, every day, I resent the fact that, the women have to do all the work. Right? There's that. So, and this is very revealing interview with you. I had no idea that I had. So let me just ask you, Doris, how has it been for you to have a book come out during the pandemic? I had one come out in April. It was awful. I hated having the book come out in the pandemic, but maybe it was different having it come out in the fall. I'm curious about that.
Yes, and Rishi has a great book that came out, I think this spring, right? In spring of 2020.
It was in April, yeah.
Because I had the privilege of hearing her read from her book and via Zoom as well. So no, I think having a book come out in the pandemic is just awful. There's not that much that's good about it.
Let's just call it what it is, okay?
Let's call it what it is. So I will say what's good about it is actually that we can do Zoom events, and that people can join us from, parts of the country and parts of the world where they would not have been able to. So I think that's definitely a silver lining. And I've but other than that, I would say there isn't that much that's been great about having a book come out in the pandemic. I feel like, most of us are just, I was actually talking to a friend about this today. There's like a blankness that has happened, like a mental blankness that I think a lot of us are experiencing, and my patients talk about it. And we've like, for the most part, concentration is shot. So I think that, and it's not been just the pandemic, it's been the pandemic and also like political and racial upheaval, injustices. We've seen sort of real ugliness around us that's very, I think, distracting and upsetting. So there's been a lot in the last year.
Yes.
So having a book, in some ways, like writing fiction has felt, or even reading fiction sometimes feels like, well, how should I be spending my time doing this when there's all this more important work that's calling? But at the same time, I do think that reading and writing fiction is enormously important, and it's been a refuge for me in terms of just in my own life reading. I have continued to read fiction, and including novels, even long ones. So it's been a way to both process what's happening and to escape what's happening. And I think, I'm hoping that launching a book that eventually, some people will read it and it'll find its way to some other people that perhaps wouldn't have come across it if it wasn't this time.
And there's something to it's so true that Zoom has this ability to connect us in a way that we wouldn't. And then at the same time, I have found that what was different between launching this book during the pandemic and my other one years ago, which is another thing we have in common, is that, long time has passed between book one and book two. But
we've been busy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just doing the here and there with a little bit of this, a little bit of that, is the ability to interact personally with a reader, which is something I think many writers crave. And I don't want to speak for them, but certainly that is my, a thing that I just love, that sort of ability to connect with a reader. And have it be in a personal way. I really miss
Absolutely.
that, and that's really something that counteracts the isolation that a writer feels all the time, that actually that your words have reached somebody in a deep, profound way. And I have to remember that still happens in that pandemic time. It's just that they can only tell you through email or,
That's right.
With a quick text or something like that, versus having a whole conversation at a bookstore.
That's right.
So, anyway.
That's right. No, I think that's absolutely true. And I'm definitely sad that I can't do these events in person because we would be looking out at everyone's faces right now. I have no idea who's out there.
Yeah.
I know there's some notes in the chat, which I'm going to look at in a minute, but it definitely changes the dynamic. And, maybe we'll have an opportunity once the pandemic is over to do some in-person events or, something like that. Hopefully. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So yeah. I don't know if we wanted to turn over to Stacy, and if there were questions from the audience. Stacy, we can only see the little stream of chat questions here, so I'm assuming that's what you're looking at too.
We've got a bunch of great questions, so if you're ready for that, we'll start with Kathleen's. Sure. And she said, is there a short story writer to whom you look for inspiration?
Yes. Hi, Kathleen. That's a great question. There are many short story writers that I look to for inspiration, and I'm probably not going to be able to name all of them right now, but I started out really loving the work of Alice Munro, who's just sort of a classic short story writer, and Jhumpa Lahiri, I read really early on in my life and just thought was fabulous. And I've read pretty much all her work, and she's of course written novels and now a kind of memoir in Italian and English, which is also wonderful if you haven't read it. And then more recently, I've gotten into, actually my daughter, who's a writer, gave me a book of Curtis Sittenfeld's short stories, which I've really been enjoying. And actually my mom is reading right now. So those are all authors that I think are fantastic short story writers. We mentioned that Rishi also has a collection of short stories out, which is older than, it's not her newest book, but we have a lot of local short story writers as well. Yeah, I think I know I'm leaving out some others, but that's a start.
Rishi, did you have any you wanted to add?
I have to say I feel like when I was trying to learn how to write, I was reading a lot of Alice Munro stories. And then my friend Daphne Calate, who's actually on this call, I see her,
Oh,
it's turned me on to Mavis Gallant. So I was reading a lot of her stories as well, especially in working through that first collection. It was really helpful to just read as many of those as I could.
yeah, Mavis Gallant is great. And yeah, there are lots of Florence. Hi, Florence and Morgan, Daphne. Yeah, I'm seeing all the people on the. Thank you all
Right.
for coming. Yeah.
Janice
Susan.
says, hello, Doris. I'm remembering when we read Middlemarch together at 7 a.m. on Thursday mornings, and it made me wonder if there are authors you were particularly influenced by. We're still at it, by the way, in the later afternoon when the weather allows. We're reading the Odyssey now.
Oh my goodness. Hi, Janice. I'm thrilled that you guys joined. Those are friends from Durham, North Carolina. And what she's referring to is actually we had a read aloud book group where we met, 6 of us met every week they've been doing it for, I don't know, like what, 40 years or something, not that long, but I joined for probably 10 or 15 years. And we met weekly and read sort of, the idea was the great books that you felt like you should have read, but never got around to, and that it might be easier doing it with someone else. So yes, Middlemarch was one of them. And I've now lost the train of your question. So what other authors?
She wants to know, yeah, authors that you're particularly influenced by.
Oh, there's so many. I mean, I think in terms of like inspiration, I think that Tolstoy was an early one just because I was so floored by the way that he could inhabit characters who were completely different from him. And I thought, like, if a writer can do that, that's what I would like to do. I would like to be able to write characters who are really different from me and somehow make them believable. So I would say he was an early, I guess, maybe not influence, but just someone I admired and aspired to write like. But more recently, I tend to read mostly contemporary fiction. So, oh gosh, I'm now blanking because there are like so many. I read all the time. I mean, Anne Patchett is great. I'm trying to think what I've read lately. Right now I'm reading Shuggie Bain, but I'm only halfway through it. So I'm gonna, I mean, it's fabulous, but I'm gonna not say too much else about it because I have to finish it first. So.
Okay. Daphne said, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Did you have something else? Okay. Daphne said, this has been such a wonderful discussion. Doris, you mentioned that you've been reading a lot during the pandemic. I wonder if there's anything in particular that has resonated with you, novels or other story collections.
So one of the books that I just loved that during the pandemic was Lily King's Writers and Lovers. And I mean, I think it's a beautiful book. And part of what I loved about it is it's also set locally, right? So it's set in Boston and Cambridge. And I think that's the one that just came right to mind when you asked that question.
I'm reading that right now too.
Oh.
I am. And I find myself, guessing again at her directions. Like when you cross the BU Bridge and she says she looks right. And I find myself saying, that's not what you see when you look right. It's been so much fun to read something like that.
It's a sad book, right? It's about grief and loss, but actually it is also, I found it very uplifting and sometimes very funny. And yeah, that sense of recognition of all the landmarks and the Canada geese on the river. And so that was I really enjoyed reading that. And then I've read some other books by like younger writers that I've enjoyed. Kylie Reid, I'm blanking on the title.
Such a Fun Age.
Yes, thank you. That was a fun book to read. And oh my gosh, what else have I read? I've tried to read some nonfiction, but I'm having trouble sort of sticking with it. on my list, I have 2 Jill Lepore books that I really want to read because I love her essays in the New Yorker, and I'm determined to read one of the books or both of the books. But again, I'm finding it harder just to concentrate on nonfiction right now. But that's next on my list.
Susan asked if you have a process for writing, schedule, materials, location, that kind of thing. And also, do you jot down notes along the way during your day, and how do you develop ideas? So that's a few questions there.
That's like 3 questions.
Yeah.
My process is, I have to say, eclectic. Basically, I just sit down and I start writing. But when I'm stuck, I find that I read poetry, so that tends to jumpstart the creative process. I think Rishi was talking before about just the fragility of the unconscious and kind of that keeping that way of thinking going, and that is very difficult when you're kind of switching back and forth between day job that's more analytical and then writing. So it's really just setting the time aside. The hours that I tend to write are the days I've set aside for writing. But sometimes if I'm really ambitious, I'll set time in the mornings before work. It's very hard to do that because for me, I'm not a morning person. So occasionally in my life, I've been able to do that. It's not a regular thing. And then, I do take notes. I take notes all the time. I have like all these little notebooks and bigger notebooks that I carry around with me. And I still seem to need paper to do that. I can't really put it into my phone, though occasionally if I'm somewhere without paper, I'll like do a voice memo or something like that if an idea strikes me. But I have all these notes that I've taken over many years. And so sometimes if I'm just starting a project, I'll read through them to try to come up with ideas. And then other times I'll remember that there's something I wanted to incorporate into a story and refer back to something I've jotted down. But I don't outline, and I'm beginning to think that maybe I should. Maybe my writing would benefit from that. I mean, I outline my nonfiction. So when I wrote my psychiatry book, obviously I did outline, and that was much more structured, and I had citations and all that. But for my fiction, I tend to just sit down and start writing, and then the next day I pick up where I left off, and sometimes I rewrite. And so it's a very slow process. That's part of why it took me so long, Rishi, between my last book.
You gotta rewrite. You've got to rewrite it a bajillion times, And I do the opposite of you. I can only write in the morning, Doris, and
You're lucky.
even if it's for a short amount of time, because the minute the day starts, it's all about the other side of the brain at work. It's all about the analytical side and the list and what time is it, and this is how much time I have to do it, and however it turns out, it's the exact opposite of the creative process, which is like, where is this going to go? I don't know how much time it's going to take. It's like everything seems to be turned on its head during the daylight hours, but in the early morning before all that starts, it just feels like it could be the other way around. So
I'm going to start trying to do that more, Rishi.
You don't get enough sleep, I'll say that. One does not get enough sleep under that model. So
Ginny Pye is here. Hi, Ginny. How do friendships with fellow writers feed you and your work?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that, the fellow writers are absolutely essential. And it took me a long time to realize that. I think that community is absolutely necessary to do this work. And that I think I failed to fully understand that when I was younger. And I learned it in part through writing residencies because it was clear that it isn't just like sitting. I always think I need more time, but you don't actually need more time. You definitely need time, but it's necessary, but not sufficient. So having other people who you can kind of talk through your work and also get feedback from, and then just inspire you. You kind of hear how other people manage their time and their the challenges and
Or
you know,
tell you can do it when you
or
just
right,
feel
that's
like
right.
you can't, or you didn't get whatever it was that you were going for. You can't, I mean, just to have somebody else who's lived through that experience. I mean, Doris, I'm with you. I couldn't have done it without the other writers that I know, that sense, and that sense of community. Yeah, there's just no way.
And I think, again, it's even, I look back at like when I started, when I had finished my training and I was in this, I have to say I was sort of depressed finishing training and realizing that I'd gone through all these years. I think I thought I was going to get to the end of training and be a writer, but I got to the end of training and, I was a psychiatrist. And so you kind of have to build your life as a writer. And so I joined like an adult ed writing group at Duke University initially, like in the adult, kind of in Boston, we have all these wonderful resources like Grub Street, which is fantastic. And I'm sure there are others, but through that, I met people who were also writing, and we started a writers group. And, I was part of that for a couple of years. And some of those folks, I don't know, there may be someone even on this call, but I've been recently in touch with someone that I knew from that group who eventually moved out of state. But, through each of those people, you meet other people, and over the years, that community grows. And, Ginny, I know a little bit from VCCA, which is a summer residency, for me, a summer residency program. Other people go other times of year, but the residencies are absolutely essential. I don't think I would have been able to write anything without residency programs, because you go and you get to write for a few weeks or a month, and I get more done in a month than like in 2 years
Agreed.
of
Oh.
life.
Yeah.
So yeah, the communities are really important. And Morgan, who I think was on this call, is someone I met in Virginia, who then introduced me to actually Daphne here in Boston. So that's how it goes.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Yeah, without a doubt.
Okay, it looks like the only other, we have some comments, but the only other question we have is from Kate. And I think that you mostly answered it about your routine, but I think what I would pull out of that is whether your routine has been different during the pandemic as opposed to before the pandemic.
I have not really had a routine during the pandemic. I mean, a writing routine. I've worked really hard to develop other routines. And I say to my patients, like, every day you have to try to stick to a routine, but it is very hard. So my writing routine has kind of gone out the window, in part because I'm working from home as a psychiatrist. And so it used to be that my life was really neatly divided into, I'd go to the office to do that work, and then I'd be in my home office to do my writing. And now it's like everything is in the same place. And, so the routine part, again, I think it's really important. It's been really difficult for me during the pandemic. I'm tweaking it like every month, and it gets a little bit better each month, but this has been going on a long time. So now that I've talked to Rishi, I'm going to start trying to get up early again. And I've been walking every day. So maybe what I need to do is kind of move the time of the walk so that I have to write before I go on the walk, and maybe that will work
That's
better.
actually what I do. But I have to tell you, like, really the only routine I've had during the pandemic is cocktail hour, which starts at 4:50. That is like the thing that happens every day, regardless of the walk, the writing, or anything else. So I don't know. That's a pretty good routine.
That's a good routine. And I'm just looking at the chat because I just saw Lisa. Hi, Lisa. I just wanted to say hi because there are a group of friends on the call who were actually classmates of my late husband's. So I'm thrilled to have you guys here.
Oh,
Thanks very much for coming. And a lot of other people whose names I haven't, Rich and Julie. Thanks everyone for the notes and for coming, obviously.
And I have to just say, in addition to Daphne and Mandy and Morgan, I see an old law school friend of mine, Marcia Gregg, which is so cool. It has been years, Marcia. So nice to see you. See you.
Right.
That's
Well,
great.
Thank you both. for this great conversation. It just flowed so naturally. It was really nice to watch, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us. We appreciate everybody who attended and the great questions that you had, and we hope that you all stay safe, and we hope to see you at future events.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very,
Yeah. Thanks.
thanks
Bill.
very much.
Have a great night.